it's Carolyn Friedlander, and I'm back with part 3 of the Pine and Bow Quilt Along. In this post, I'm going to show you an update on my project, and then I'm also going to share with you tips and tricks for pine. All right, let's take a look at my blocks first. So yeah, I'm super excited. If you'll watch 2 posts ago when I talk about my fabric pool for my pine project, I'm drawn to peachy pinks, some beiges, but mostly it's just like a really peachy pink palette that was inspired by a visit to a museum recently. So let's take a look at my blocks so far. Yeah, I don't know, they're pretty fun. I've got a big mix of fabrics going on here. I know that in the prior post I talked about having some accents, some blue, some black, that deep green, but so far I'm just really liking the direction of peaches and pinks, although I just brought in this, I don't know, it's a little bit sagey, but I kind of liked the brown that was coming out of this one, and I don't know, together I just think it's a really nice mix. I don't really have a plan for what I'm going to do with these blocks. We'll see. I'm just kind of making them right now, and it's making me feel good about exploring color, exploring fabrics, playing with my scraps. So creatively I'm getting a lot out of it, and it's pretty satisfying to come together. I'll probably just end up doing a small wall hanging, something like that. So I think I'll keep going with these blocks. One of my tips for working with your blocks and with your fabrics, especially if you're doing a direction like this one where it's a little bit scrappy and you don't have every single block planned out. The first block I started with was this one, and I was just really excited about this combination, this very saturated cantaloupe color with this pretty dusty rose. And so from there, usually when I'm sewing one, in my mind I'm starting to get excited about the next fabric combination. So I don't know which one I made next, maybe it was this one. And this is actually a double gauze. I've never foundation paper pieced with a double gauze, but it was the colors that I wanted, and I had this scrap of fabric. So it worked out really great. The paper really acts as a great foundation for keeping everything nice and even. So yeah, I started with the first one I was really excited about. As I'm sewing, I'm kind of asking myself questions like, ooh, I wonder what that scrap's gonna look with this one. So by my sewing machine, I've got all of the fabrics that I pulled, and I'm sort of starting to pair up the next block in my mind as I'm sewing my first block. And then one really good tip for continuing is that when you're going to stop for the day, pick out your combination for the next block so that when you are getting ready to sew, you don't have to think about it. You can just jump into the block, sew that, and that should hopefully get your mind back into figuring out your combinations. So it's pretty fun. So these are my blocks so far. A couple of tips and tricks for pine. First, I want to share with you a look at my sewing setup for when I'm foundation paper piecing. I thought I'd give you a tour of my sewing space and how I have my sewing space set up for paper piecing. First, let's see. So normally my ironing board is a little closer to the wall, but I move it closer to my machine so that I can easily access it. When you are foundation paper piecing, you are sewing, cutting, and ironing one right after the other, kind of on repeat. So it's nice to have all of your stuff close and easily accessible. So my iron, I've cleared off some space next to my sewing machine, so that's where I can cut larger pieces of fabric. You'll see I've got the blocks I've sewn so far. I always like to have a space for them so that I can see how the project is shaping up. So since these blocks are small, it's okay that they are behind my sewing machine, but it would be nice to just put them up on the wall. I kind of cleared off the wall to give me space for that. So I might do that. It would make it kind of nice. I've got my sewing machine. The thread that I'm using is just a light neutral gray. So anytime I'm paper piecing, I like using a very neutral color that defers to the lightest color. So if I'm ever paper piecing with white fabric, then there's going to be white thread. Otherwise, that kind of light gray is my go-to. And then on this side of the machine, actually, let's look down here. I've got 2 trash cans. One's for paper, one's for fabric. This way I can recycle the paper. And this is my cutting station. So my cutting station, I've got my pattern here and extra templates. I have an X-Acto for cutting the templates, my rotary cutter, smaller ruler. These are kind of the scraps that are in progress. And then I have a light table here. So this is by daylight, and it does make it a lot easier to see through the paper. This one is dimmable. And then I have a translucent cutting mat on top so I can cut and sew at the same time. I like having a little thread catcher here for the little pieces, and my ruler for trimming. And then this space here is where I'm going to put my block pieces as I'm making them. I also like to have kind of a bookmark or an index card that helps fold back your paper as you're working. I find that this setup works really well for foundation paper piecing, to have my iron on that side, sewing, and then my cutting light table station on the right, and then my round chair just swivels between all the spaces. So that's my setup. So as you can see, I like having everything really close. With foundation paper piecing, you are doing your ironing, you're sewing, and you're cutting. So it's really nice to have all of those stations close, nearby. One tip that I like for foundation paper piecing is talking about the paper itself. So my preference for foundation paper piecing is to use recycled office paper. What I like about recycled office paper is, one, it's very accessible. You can pick it up at pretty much any big box store. And so if I run out, it's very easy to get more. The second thing that I really like about recycled office paper is that it's very stable. So it's really nice, especially when you are working with different types of fabric, to have a nice stable background or stable foundation for your blocks. And then the third thing that I really like about using recycled office paper specifically is that, one, it's a pretty conscientious choice to use recycled paper, but two, it just makes it a little bit thinner, so it makes it really nice to see through. I also will double print onto my office paper, so if you're new to foundation paper piecing, don't worry about this tip. Use a fresh piece of paper so that there aren't conflicting lines that you have to worry about. But for me, I just have a stack of paper in my office that I've already printed on once. It's maybe scraps, it's stuff that I don't need, that I've run off for whatever. And then, but one side is blank. And so usually for my foundation paper piecing blocks, I will print onto that back side of the paper my templates. So that way the paper's already been used once and it was heading for the recycling bin anyway, but here it's going to get another use. Another tip for foundation paper piecing is to shorten your stitch length. So I like using a 1.5 millimeter stitch. It's a pretty tight stitch. It makes for a really good tight seam. It also perforates the paper more, which makes the paper much easier to remove later. And then another tip that'll make the paper easier to remove later is anytime I'm sewing 2 blocks together or 2 sections of a block together, I'm going to take out the paper in that seam allowance. So that just makes, this one's already coming loose. And actually you can see how this is a piece of paper I've already printed on. So that's an example of what I'm talking about by reusing that paper. But yeah, by removing the paper just in the seam allowance when you're sewing those blocks or sections together, it reduces bulk in the seam, and it makes it much easier to remove the paper later. Each week I'm answering 3 questions from you. You can submit your questions in the description below, but this week I'll answer 3 more of your questions. Ellen K at Textile Love asks, when picking fabrics for a project, how often do you go with your first pull on colors and prints, like your first gut instinct? And how often do you shuffle things around in order to find a combination you like better? And along those lines, how do you choose fabrics for a project? Such a good question, Ellen. Yeah, I think that going with your gut is, starting with your gut at least, is a great place to start. I think that the projects that we are most excited about are the ones that end up being the most fulfilling, end up being kind of the most exciting. So that all definitely starts with kind of an instinct. So whether it's a curiosity about a color, a print, a new fabric that you picked up at the store, I usually start with my gut instinct. And I would say that I pretty much always, that's always the start, but I am open to things that I learn and discover along the way. So, so I think, how often do you shuffle things around in order to find a combination you like better? I think that could speak to, I love the discovery of new things in kind of following a path. But if I am ever exploring a project and finding myself either coming up with too many options or teetering on any kind of indecision, I'm very cautious about that. I will either give myself a time limit, or actually that's usually what I do, is I just give myself a time limit. I'm like, all right, we're going to make a decision by this point, just because I know how risky it can be to fall into a rabbit hole. And then, I don't know, then you're just feeling overwhelmed, and that's not good. So I hope that answers your question. Next question, Marianne asks, what batting and thread do you use? Okay, I'll start with thread. So for thread, I like using, now for foundation paper piecing, I use 50 weight Aurifil cotton. For appliqué, for needle turn appliqué, I use 50 weight Aurifil cotton for the basting and 80 weight Aurifil cotton for the appliqué stitches itself. And I'll put a link in the description below that has a list of my favorite appliqué tools, because I know that mentions the thread choices that I like. When I'm hand quilting, I use a bunch of different kinds of thread, mainly sashiko and pearl cotton. Those work well too. And I'll put a link in the description for a post that I made that outlines some of those as well. As far as batting, I've definitely changed my batting preferences over the years that I've been a quilter. Most recently, I am really loving Quilter's Dream Request polyester. And I know some people might cringe about polyester, but one, I will say definitely if you're going to go with polyester or any kind of batting, go with a really good manufacturer. And Quilter's Dream is great. Their polyester batting, what I like about it is that after trying all different types of batting in combination with, different fabrics on top, different piecing styles, whether there's a lot of piecing or a little bit of piecing, hand quilting, machine quilting. Lately, I just really like the look and feel, mainly the feel of that polyester batting in the middle, because it's very light weight. It doesn't feel very dense. And especially if you're going to hand quilt, which I've been doing so much hand quilting lately, I just really like the overall result. I just think it feels really nice. So that's what I've been using lately. Leslie asks, the noodlehead prints are cotton linen, right? Are you using those for the backgrounds or the appliques? I have a few pieces of linen blend that would be amazing appliques, but I'm scared. It's a super great question. So anytime you are mixing fabric types in applique, in needle turned applique, my preference is to have the heavier fabrics as the background and then equal or lighter fabrics as the applique. And the reason for that is that as you are doing your needle turn applique, the applique is getting manipulated, by your hands, you're turning it all under. And so you really want a background fabric that's going to stand up to that kind of manipulation. And and it just works better if you have the heavier fabric on the back, that's gonna stand up to the manipulation on the front. But if you have the lighter fabric on back and a heavier fabric on the front, then, it just may not hold up as well. It might want to shrink. It might get warped or manipulated just because of the bulk of the applique, the thicker fabric being used for the applique might do that to the background. And so a couple things to think about that. One, I always think that if you are really excited about a combination and that happens to be, a lighter fabric as your background and the applique fabric is a thicker fabric, it could be those colors, it could be the prints, it could be the way it works out. Just because, I think in an ideal scenario, I wouldn't want to do that. If it's the right colors and the right fabrics for what you're wanting to do in your project, then, I'm definitely someone to say go for it. Do the things that you want to do and just make try to compensate for the challenges of that situation however you can. So For example, one easy solution would be you could add interfacing to your background fabric. So that'll beef it up a little bit, make it a little more stable and strong. It'll bring that balance a little more in place. So that's one idea. Another idea is just to be very careful and conscious of how you're manipulating that fabric, that you're not scrunching up the background as you're turning under the thicker fabric, that the background isn't losing ground to the applique. And then kind of a third idea that I have for this scenario is that you could cut your background fabric larger, because what could happen in that scenario is that your background fabric will shrink under the pressure of, the applique fabric, eating away, I guess, at the background. So if you were to cut your backgrounds larger, that would give you more space to trim it down to the correct size block at the end. So those are a few different things to try, but mainly, my takeaway from this is that, be aware of things that can happen, but if you are in a situation where you really want to try it, use fabrics in a certain way, I definitely encourage you to go for that and just compensate for those challenges the best way that you can. So I hope that helps. Thank you so much for joining in. It's been so great seeing everyone's projects online. If you would like to share your project, use the hashtag PineBowQAL. That way we can all see it and be inspired and excited about what you're making. You can always like and subscribe to my channel so that you can get updates when they are coming out. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next time.